Hello and welcome back to my channel, students. So this is Tulika Sengupta and you are listening Easy Audiobook. So today I will be narrating your 7th chapter, that is Ivan tries an O level from your book Vistas class 12. So before starting the video, I must tell you that this video is going to be very long one because this chapter is quite long. So we have something about the characters, dramatis personae, the secretary of the examination board, the governor of HM prison, Oxford, James Evans, a prisoner, Mr. Jackson, a prison officer, Mr. Stephens, a prison officer, the Reverend McCleary, an invigilator, Mr. Carter, detective superintendent, Mr. Bell, detective chief inspector. All precautions have been taken to see to it that the O-level German examination arranged in the prison for Evans does not provide him with any means of escape. It was in early March when the secretary of the examination board received the call from Oxford prison. It's a slightly unusual request, Governor, but I don't see why we shouldn't try to help. Just the one fellow, you say? That's it. Chap called Evans started night classes in O-level German last September. Says he has dead keen to get some sort of academic qualification. Is he any good? Like, he was the only one in the class. So you can say he's had individual tuition all the time. Really? Would have cost him a packet if he had been outside. Well, let's give him a chance, shall we? That's jolly kind of you. What exactly the procedure now? Oh, don't worry about that. I'll be sending you all forms and stuffs. What's his name? You say Evans? James Roderick Evans. It sounded rather grand. Just one thing, Governor. He's not a violent sort of fellow, is he? I don't want to know his criminal record or anything like that, but no, there's no record of violence. Quite a pleasant sort of chap. They tell me, but a bit of a card, really? One of the stars at the Christmas concert, imitations, the sort of thing, right? Like Mike Yarwood stuff? No, he's just a cognitive kleptomaniac. That's all. The governor was tempted to add something else, but he thought better of it. He had looked after that particular side of things himself. Presumably, said the secretary, you can arrange a room where? No problem. He's in a cell on his own. If you have no objection, he can sit the exam in there. That's fine. And we could easily get one of the parson from St. Mary's Mags to invigilate. If that's yes, fine, yes. They seem to have a lot of parson there, don't they? The two men chuckled good naturedly. The secretary had a final thought. At least there's one thing. You shouldn't have much trouble keeping him incommunicado, should you? The governor chuckled politely once more, reiterated his thanks, and slowly cradled the phone. Evans? Evans the Break, as the prison officer called him. Thrice he had escaped from prison, and but for the recent wave of unrest in the maximum security establishment up north, he wouldn't now be gracing the governor's premises in Oxford. And the governor was going to make absolutely certain that he wouldn't be disgracing them. Not that Evans was a real burden, just a persistent nagging presence. He had be all right in Oxford, though the governor would see to that. Would see to it personally, and besides, there was just a possibility that Evans was genuinely interested in O-level German. Just a slight possibility, just a very slight possibility. At 8:30 p.m. on Monday, 7 June, Evans' German teacher shook him by the hand in the heavily guarded recreational block just across from D Wing. Guten Gluck, Herr Evans. Pardon? I said, good luck. Good luck for tomorrow. Oh, thanks. Tan Kei Shong. You haven't a cat in hell's chance of getting though, of course, but I may surprise everybody, said Evans. At 8:30 the following morning, Evans had a visitor, two visitors, in fact. He tucked his grubby string vest into his equally grubby trouser, and stood up from his bunk, smiling cheerfully. Morning, Mr. Jackson. This is indeed an honor. Jackson was the senior prison officer on D-Wing, and he and Evans had already become warm enemies. At Jackson's side stood Officer Stephen, a burly, surely looking man, only recently recruited to the profession. Jackson nodded curtly. And how's our little Einstein this morning, then? Wasn't he a mathematician, Mr. Jackson? I think he was a Jew, Mr. Jackson. Ivan's face was shaven, and he wore a filthy looking red and white bauble hat upon his head. Give me a chance, Mr. Jackson. I was just going to shave when you just burst in. Which reminds me, Jackson turned his eyes on Stephens. Make sure you take his razor out of the cell when he's finished scraping that ugly mug off its face. Clear? One of these days he will do us all a favor and cut his bloody throat. For a few seconds, Evans looked thoughtfully at the man standing Rom Road straight in front of him. A string of Second World War medals proudly paraded over his left breast pocket. Mr. Jackson, was it you who took my nail scissors away? Evans had always worried about his hands. And your nail files too? Look, for a moment, Evans' eyes smoldered dangerously, but Jackson was ready for him. Orders of Governor Evans. He leaned forward and leered, his voice dropping to harsh and contemptuous whisper. You want to complain? Evans shrugged his shoulder tightly. The crisis was over. You've got half an hour to smarten yourself up, Evans, and take the bloody hat off. Me hat? Ugh. Evans put his right hand lovingly on top of the filthy woolen and smiled sadly. Do you know, Mr. Jackson, it's the only thing that's ever brought me any shot of luck in life. Kind of lucky charm, if you know what I mean. And today I thought, well, with my exam and all that, buried somewhere in Jackson was a tiny core of compassion, and Evans knew it. Just this once, then Shirley Temple. If there was one thing that Jackson genuinely loved about Evans, is it was his long wavy hair and get shaving. At 8:45 the same morning, the Reverend Stuart McCleary left his bachelor flat in Broad Street and stepped out briskly towards Carfax. The weatherman reported temperatures considerably below the normal for early June, and for a long black overcoat and shallow crowned clerical hat provided welcome protection for the steady drizzle which had set in half an hour earlier, and which now spattered the thick lenses of his spectacles. In his right hand he was carrying a small brown suitcase which contained all that he would need for his morning duties, including a sealed question paper envelope, a yellow invigilation form, a special authentication card from the examination board, a paper knife, a Bible. He was to speak to the Woman Guild that afternoon on the Book of Ruth, and current copy of the Church Time. The 2-hour examination was scheduled to start at 9:15 a.m. Evans was lathering his face vigorously when Stephens brought in two small square tables and set them opposite each other in the narrow space between the bunk on the one side and on the other side a distempered stone wall. Next, Stephens brought in two hard chairs, the slightly less battered of which he placed in front of the table, which stood nearly the cell door. Jackson put in a brief final appearance. Behave yourself, laddie. Evans turned and nodded. And these? Jackson pointed to the pin-ups of. Evans turned and nodded again. I was going to take them down anyway. A minister, isn't he? The chap coming to sit in, I mean. And how did you know that? Asked Jackson quietly. Well, I had to sign some forms, didn't I? And I couldn't help. Evans drew the razor carefully down his left cheek and left a neat swath in the white leather. Can I ask you something, Mr. Jackson? Why did they
bug me in the cell. He nodded his head vaguely to a point above the door. Not a very neat job, conceded Jackson. They are not. They don't honestly think I'm going to try to. They are taking no chances, Evans. Nobody in his senses would take any chance with you. Who's going to listen in? I will tell you who's going to listen in, laddie. It's the governor himself. See? He doesn't trust you a bloody inch, or nor do I. I'll be watching you like a hawk, Evans, so you keep your nose clean, clear. He walked toward the door. Evans nodded. He had already thought of that, and number two handkerchief was lying ready on the bunk, a neatly folded square of off-white linen. Just one more thing, Einstein. Yeah? What's that? Good luck, old son. In the little lodge just inside the prison's main gate, the Reverend S. McCleary signed his name neatly in the visitor's book, and thence walked side by side with the silent prison officer across the exercise yard to D Wing, where he was greeted by Mr. Jackson. The wing's heavy outer door was unlocked and locked behind them. A heavy inner door the same, and McCleary was handed into Stephen's keeping. Get the razor, murmured Jackson. Stephen nodded. Well, keep your eyes skinned clear. Clear? Stephen nodded again, and McCleary, his feet changing up the iron stairs, followed his new guide and finally stood before a cell door, where Stephens opened the peephole and looked through. That's him, sir. Evans, facing the door, sat quietly at the farther of the two tables, his whole attention riveted to a textbook of elementary German grammar. Stephen took the key from its ring, and the cell lock sprang back with a thudded metallic twang. It was 9:10 a.m. when the governor switched on the receiver. He had instructed Jackson to tell Evans of the temporary little precautions. That was only fair, as if Evans wouldn't spot it. But wasn't it all a bit theatrical, schoolboyish almost? How on earth was Evans going to try anything on today? If he was so anxious to make another break, why in heaven's name hadn't he tried it? From the recreational block? Much easier, but he hadn't, and there he was now, sitting in a locked cell, all the prison officers on the alert, two more locked doors between his cell and the yard, and a yard with a wall as high as a haystack. Yes, Evans was as safe as houses. Anyway, it wouldn't be any trouble at all to have the receiver turned on for the next couple of hours or so. It wasn't as if there was going to be anything to listen to, was it? Amongst other things, an invigilator's duty was to ensure that the strictest silence was observed. But, but still, that little nagging doubt. Might Evans try to take advantage of McCleary? Get him to smuggle in a chisel or two, a rope ladder, or. The governor sat up sharply. It was all very well getting rid of any potential weapon that Evans could have used. But what about McCleary? What if, quite unwittingly, the innocent McCleary had brought in something himself? A jackknife, perhaps? And what if Evans held him hostage with such a weapon? The governor reached for the phone. It was 9:12 a.m. The examinee and the invigilator had already been introduced by Stephen when Jackson came back and shouted to McCleary through the cell door, "Can you come outside a minute, sir?" You too, Stephens. Jackson quickly explained the governor's worries, and McCleary patiently held out his arms for shoulder level, wrist whistle. Jackson lightly frisked his clothes. Something hard here, sir. My reading glasses, replied McCleary, looking down at the spectacle case. Jackson quickly reassured him and blunted down on the landing. Thumb flickered the catch on the suitcase. He picked up each envelope in turn, carefully passed his palm along their surface, and seemed satisfied. He riffled curiously through a few pages of Holy Writ and vaguely shook the church times. All right so far, but one of the objects in McCleary's suitcase was puzzling him sorely. Do you mind telling me why you have bought this, sir? He held up a smallish, semi inflated rubber ring, such as a young child with the rest of about 12 inches might have struggled into. You think of going for a swim, sir? McClary's hitherto amiable demeanor was slightly ruffled by this tasteless little pleasantry, and he answered Jackson somewhat sorely. If you must know, I suffer from uh, hemorrhoids, like piles, and when I'm sitting down for any length of time, very sorry, sir, I didn't mean to. Like the embarrassment was still emboldening Jackson's cheek when he found the paper knife at the bottom of the case. I think I would better keep this though, if you don't mind. That's it. That is, sir. It was 9:18 a.m. before the governor heard their voices again, and it was clear that the examination was going to be more than a little late in getting underway. McClary, we have got a watch, Evans. Yes, sir. McClary, I'll be telling you when to start and again when you have 5 minutes left. All right? Silence. McClary, there's plenty more of this writing paper. Should you need it? Silence. McClary, now write the name of the paper 021-1 in the top left hand corner. Silence. McClary, in the top right hand corner, write your index number 313. And in the box just below that, write your center number 271A. Right? Since the silence, 9:20 a.m. McClary, I'm now going to. Evans is not going to stay there, is he? McClary, I don't know about that. Stephens, Mr. Jackson's given me strict instructions too. Evans, how am I supposed to concentrate on my exam with someone breathing down my neck? Christ, sorry, sir, I didn't mean. The governor reached for the phone. Jackson, ah, good. Get Stephens out of the cell, will you? I think we are perhaps overdoing things. As you wish, sir. The governor heard the exchanges in the cell, heard the door clank once more, and heard McClary announce that the examination had begun at last. It was 9:25 a.m. and there was a great calm. At 9:40 a.m., the examination board rang through, and the assistant secretary with special responsibility for modern language asked to speak to the governor. The examination had already started, no doubt. Ah, a quarter of an hour ago. Yes, well, there was a correction slip which some fool had forgotten to place in the examination package. Very brief. Could the governor please? Yes, of course. I'll put you straight through to Mr. Jackson in Deaving. Hold the line a minute. Was this the sort of thing the governor had feared? Was the phone call a fake, some signal, some secret message? But he could check on that immediately. He dialed the number of examination board but heard only the scratcho bleeps of a line engaged. But then the line was engaged, wasn't it? Yes, not very intelligent. That 2 minutes later he heard some whispered communication in the cell, and then McCleary Boat's squat voice. Will you please stop writing and we while Mr. Evans and listen carefully. Candidate offering German 021-1 should note the following correction on page 3. Line 15, the fourth word should read gol- goldenen, not goldene, and the whole phrase will therefore read Jum goldenen loven, not Jum goldene loven. I will repeat that. The governor listened and smiled. He had taken German in the sixth form from himself, and he remembered all about the arrangement of adjectives. And so did McCleary. By the sound of things, for the minister's pronunciation was most impressive. But what about Evans? He probably didn't know what an adjective was. The phone rang again. The magistrate court. They needed a prison van and a couple of prison officers. Remand case. And within 2 minutes, the governor was wondering whether that could be a hoax. He told himself not to be so silly. His imagination was beginning to run a riot. Evans, for the first quarter of an hour, Stephen had doubtfully peeped through the peephole at intervals of 1 minute or so, and after that every 2 minutes. At 10:45 a.m., everything was still all right, and he looked through the peephole once more. It took 4 or 5 seconds, no more. What was the point? It was always more or less the same. Evans, his pen between his lips, sat staring straight in front of him towards the door, seeking, it seemed, surely needed inspiration from somewhere. And opposite him, McCleary seated slightly asked from the table now, his face in semi profile, his hair, as Stephen had noticed earlier, amateurishly clipped pretty closely to the scalp, his eyes behind the table lenses peering short-sightedly at the church times, his right index finger hooked beneath the narrow clerical collar, and the finger of the left hand, the nails meticulously manicured, slowly stroking the short black beard. At 10:50 a.m., the receiver cracked to life, and the governor realized he had almost forgotten Evans for a few minutes. Evans, please, sir, a whisper. Evans, please, sir, louder. Would you mind if I put a blanket round me? My shoulders, sir. It's a bit cracky in there, isn't it? Silent. Evans, there's one of me punk there, sir. Be quick about it. Silence. At 10:51 a.m., Stephens was more than a little surprised to see a grey regulation blanket wrapped around Evans' shoulders, and he frowned slightly and looked at the examinee more closely. But Evans, the pen still between his teeth, was staring just as vacantly as before, blankly beneath a blanket. Should Stephen report the slight irregularity? Anything at all fishy, hadn't Jackson said? He looked through the peephole once again, and even as he did so, Evans pulled the dirty blanket more closely to himself. Was he planning a sudden Batman leap to suffocate McClary in the blanket? Don't be daft. There was never any sun on this side of the prison, no heating either during the summer months, and it could get quite chilly in some of the cells. Stephen decided to revert to his earlier every minute observation. At 11:20 a.m., the receiver once again crackled across the silence of the governor's office, and McClary informed Evans that only 5 minutes remained. The examination was almost over now, but something still crawled away quietly in the governor's mind. He reached for the phone once more. At 11:22 a.m., Jackson shouted along the corridor to Stephens. The governor wanted to speak with him. Hurry, man! Stephens picked up the phone apprehensively and listened to the rapidly spoken order. Stephens himself was to accompany McCleary to the main prison gate. Understood? Stephens personally was to make absolute sure that the door was locked on Evans after McCleary had left the cell. Understood? Understood. At 11:25 a.m., the governor heard the final exchange. McCleary, stop writing, please. Silence. Sheets in order, and see theirs correctly numbered. Silence. Scrapping of chairs and tables. Evans, thank you very much, sir. McCleary, right, was it? All right, was it? Evans, not too bad. McCleary, good. Mr. Stephen, very loud. The governor heard the door clang for the last time. The examination was over. How did he get on, do you think? Asked Stephens as he walked beside McCleary to the main gates. I cannot think he has distinguished himself. I am afraid his Scott accent seemed broader than ever, and his long black overcoat, reaching almost to his knees, fostered the illusion that he had suddenly grown slimmer. Stephens felt pleased that the governor had asked him, and not Jackson, to see McCleary off the premises, and all in all the morning had gone pretty well, but something stopped him from making his way directly to the canteen from a belated cup of coffee. He wanted to take just one last look at Evans. It was like a program he had seen on TV about a woman who could never really convince herself that she had locked the front door when she had gone to bed. Often she had got up 12, 15 times, sometimes 20 times to check the polls. He re entered D Wing, made his way along the Evans cell and opened the peephole once more. Oh no, Christ, no! There, sprawled back in Ivan's chair, was a man. For a semi-second, Stephen thought it was to be Ivan's. A grey regulation blanket slipping from his shoulders, the front of his closely cropped, irregularly tuffled hair, awash with fierce red blood which had dripped already through the small black beard, and was even now spreading horribly over the white clerical collar and down into the black clerical front. Stephen shouted wildly for Jackson, and the words appeared to penetrate the curtains of blood that veiled McCleary's ears. For the minister's hand felt feebly for a handkerchief from his pocket and held it to his bleeding head, the blood seeping slowly through the white linen. He gave a long, low moan and tried to speak, but his voice trailed away. And by the time Jackson had arrived and dispatched Stephens to ring the police and the ambulance, the handkerchief was a sticky, squelchy wall of cloth. McClary slowly raised himself, his face twisted tightly with pain. Dina, worry about the ambulance. Man, I am alright. I am alright. Get the police. I know where he is. He closed his eyes and another drip of blood splashed like a huge red raindrop on the wooden floor. His hand felt along the table, found the German question paper, and grasped it tightly in his blood-stained hand. Get the governor. I know where's Evans. Almost immediately, sirens were sounding. Prison officers barked order. Puzzled prisoners pushed their way along the corridor. Doors were banged and bolted, and phones were ringing everywhere. And within a minute, McClary, with Jackson and Stephen supporting him on either side, his face now streaked and caked with drying blood, was greeted in the prison yard by the governor, perplexed and grim. We must get you to hospital immediately. I just don't. We have called the police. Yes, yes, they are on their way, but I'm all right. I'm all right. Look here. Awkwardly, he opened the German question paper and thrust it before the governor's face. It's there. Do you see what I mean? The governor looked down and realized what McClary was trying to tell him. A photocopied sheet had been carefully and cleverly superimposed over the last, originally blank, page of the question paper. Yeah, see what they have done, Governor. You see, this voice trailed off again as the governor, dreading the layers of long neglected learnings, willed himself to translate the German text before him. Sei solontem Sconch vera Bridenten Plan genau folgen. Der Witteg Jetpuntak ist 3 Minuten vor Ende des Examines. You must follow the plan already, some think. The vital point in time is 3 minutes before the end of the examination, but something. Don't hit him too hard. Remember, he is a minister. And don't overdo the Scott accent when a fast approaching siren wailed to its crescendo. The great doors of the prison yard were pushed back, and a white collar car squealed to a jerky halt beside them. Detective Superintendent Carter swung himself out of the passenger seat and saluted the governor. What the hell's happening, sir? And turning to McClary, Christ, who's hit him? But McClary cut across whatever explanation the governor might have given Elsfield Way. Officer, I know was where Evans. He was breathing heavily and leaned for support against the side of the car, where the imprint of his hand was left in tarnished crimson. In bewilderment, Carter looked to the governor for guidance. What? Take him with you. If you think he will be all right, he is the only one who seems to know what's happening. Carter opened the back door and helped McClary inside, and within a few seconds the car leaped away in a spurt of gravel. Elsfield Way, McClary had said, And there it was, starting up at the governor form, the last few lines of the German text. From Espelveld, we drive to Headington roundabout, where, yes, of course, the examination board was in Elsfield Way, and someone from the board must have been involved in the escape plan from the very beginning. The question paper itself, the correction slip. The governor turned to Jackson and Stephen. I don't need to tell you what's happened, do I? His voice sounded almost calm in the scathing contempt. And which one of you two morons was it who took Evans for a nice little walk to the main gates and waved him bye bye? It was me, sir, stammered Stephen. Just like you told me, sir. I couldn't have sworn. What, just like I told you? You say? What the hell? When you rang, sir, and told me to. When was that? The governor's voice was whiplash now. You know, sir, about 20 past 11 just before. You blithering idiot, man. It wasn't me who rang you. Don't you realize? But what was the use? He had used the telephone at that time, but only to try unsuccessfully once more to get through the examination board. He shook his head in growing despair and turned on the senior prison officer. As for you, Jackson, how long have you been pretending you have got a brain, eh? Well, I will tell you something, Jackson. Your skull's empty, absolutely empty. It was Jackson who had spent 2 hours in Ivan's cell the previous evening, and it was Jackson who had confidently reported that there was nothing hidden away there, nothing at all. And yet Evans had somehow managed to conceal not only a false beard, a pair of spectacles, a dog collar, and all the rest of his clerical paraphernalia, but also some sort of weapon with which he had given McCleary such a terrible blow across his head. Oh! A prison van packed alongside by the governor made no immediate move. He looked down again at the last line of the German. To the Headington roundabout, where you go straight over and make your way to Norgraben. Norgraben? Where on earth? New something? New grave? Never heard of it. There was a war grave somewhere near Reading, but no, it was probably a code word or. And then it hit him. Newbury! God, yes, Newbury was a pretty big sort of place, but he rapped out his order to the driver. St. Altadet's police station and step on it. Take Jackson and Stephens here, and when you get there, ask for Bell, Chief Inspector Bell. Got that? He leaped the stairs to his office, three at a time, got Bell on the phone immediately, and put the facts before him. We will get him, sir, said Bell. We will get him, with a bit of a luck. The governor sat back and lit a cigarette. Yeah, God, what a beautifully laid plan it had all been. What a clever fellow Evans was, careless leaving that question paper behind. But then they all made their mistakes somewhere along the line. Well, almost all of them. And that's why very, very shortly Mr. Clever Evans would be back inside doing his once more. The phone on his desk erupted in a strident burst. The Superintendent Carter informed him that McCleary had spotted Evans driving off along Elsfield Way. They had got the number of the car all right and had given chase immediately, but had lost him in the Headington roundabout. He must have doubled back into the city. No, said the governor quietly. No, he is on his way to Newbury. He explained his reason for believing so and left it at that. It was a police job now, not his. He was just another good for a giggle. Gulliby governor, that was all. By the way, Carter, I hope you managed to get McCleary to the hospital all right. Yes, he's in the Red Cliff now. Really groggy. He was when we got the examination officers and they rang for the ambulance from there. The governor rang the Red Cliff a few minutes later and asked for the accident department. McCleary, you say? Yes, he's a parson. I don't think there's anyone. Yes, there is. You will find one of your ambulance picked him up from Esfield Way about. Oh, that! Yes, he sent an ambulance all right. But when we got there, the fellow had gone. No one seemed to know where he was. Just vanished, not a sign. But the governor was no longer listening, and the truth seemed to hit him with an almost physical impact, where somewhere in the back of his neck. A quarter of an hour later, they found the Reverend S. McCleary surely bound and gagged in his study in Broad Street. He had been there, he said, since 8:15 a.m. when two men had called, and inquiries in Newbury throughout the afternoon produced nothing, nothing at all, and by tea time everyone in the prison knew what had happened. It had not been Evans impersonating McCleary who had walked out. It had been Evans impersonating McCleary, who had stayed in. The fish and chips were delicious, and after a gentle stroll round the centre of Chipping Norton, Evans decided to return to the hotel and have an early night. A smart new hat concealed the fricket of his closely chopped hair, and he kept it on as he walked up to the reception desk of the Golden Lion. It would take a good while for his hair to regain its former glory. But what the hell did that matter? He was out again, wasn't he? A bit of bad luck that when Jackson had pinched his scissor, for it had meant a long and tricky operation with his only razor blade. The previous night, but he had had his good luck too. Just think, if Jackson had made him take his bobble hat off, phew, that really had been a close call. Still, old Jackson wasn't such a bad fellow. One of the worst things, funny really, had been the beard. He had always been allergic and sticking plaster, and even now his chin was irritatingly sore and red. The receptionist wasn't the same girl who had booked him in, but the change was definitely for the better. As he collected his keys, he gave her his best smile, told her he wouldn't be bothering with breakfast, ordering the Daily Express, and asked for an early morning call at 6:45 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be another busy day. He whistled softly to himself as he walked up the board stairs. He shots of liked the idea of being dressed up as a minister, dog collar and everything. Yes, it had been a jolly good idea for McCleary to wear two black front two collars. But that top collar, phew, that had kept on slipping off the back stud, and there had been that one panicky moment when McCleary had only just got his hand up to his neck in time to stop the collar springly apart from before Stephens. Ah, they had got that little problem worked out all right. Though a pen stuck in the mouth whenever the evil eye had appeared at the peephole, easy, but all the fiddling about under the blanket with the black front and the stud at the back of the collar that had been far more difficult than they had ever bargained for. Everything else had gone beautifully smoothly, though in the car he had found something they had promised him: soap and water, clothes, the map. Yes, the map, of course, the Ordnance Survey, the map of Oxfordshire. He had got some good friends, some very clever friends. Christ, he unlocked his bedroom door and closed it quietly behind him, and then stood frozen to the spot, like a man who has just caught a glimpse of a gorgon. Sitting on the narrow bed was the very last man in the world that Evans had expected or wanted to see. It's not worth trying anything, said the governor quietly, as Evans' eyes darted desperately around the room. I have got men all around the place. Will there were only two, really? But Evans needn't know that. He let the words sink in. Woman too? Didn't you think the blonde girl in reception was rather sweet? Evans was visibly shaken. He sat down slowly in the only chair the small room could offer and held his head between his hands. For several minutes there was utter silence. Finally he spoke. It was the bloody correction slip, I suppose. Well, the governor failed to mask the deep satisfaction in his voice. There are a few people who know a little German. Slowly, very slowly, Evans relaxed. He was bitten and he knew it. He sat up at last and managed to smile ruefully. It wasn't really a mistake. You see, we hadn't been able to fix up any hotel, but we could have worked that some other way. No, the really important thing was for the phone to ring just before the exam finished to get everyone out of the way for a couple of minutes. So we had to know exactly when the exam started, didn't we? And like fool, I presented you with that little piece of information on a plate. Well, somebody did. So you see, sir, that correction slip killed two little birds with a single stone, didn't it? The name of the hotel for me and the exact time of the exam started for them for forever. Like the governor nodded. It's a pretty common word. Good job. It is pretty common, sir. Or I had never have known where to come to, would I? Nice name though. Jum, Golden and Loven. How did you know which golden lion it was? There's hundreds of them. Same as you, Evans. Index number 313, center number 271. Remember? Six figures. And if you take an ordnance survey map of Oxfordshire, you find that six figure reference 313 by 271 lands you bang in the middle of the Chipping Norton. Yeah, you're right. We had opened, you had run off to Newbury. We did. Well, that's something, I suppose. That question paper, Evans, could you really understand that German? I could hardly. Nah, course I couldn't. I knew roughly what it was all about, but we just opened it through a few spanner in the work. Sort of muddle everybody a bit. The governor stood up. Tell me one thing before we go. How on earth did you get all the blood to pour over your head? Ivan suddenly looked a little happier. Clever, sir. Very clever, that was. How to get a couple of pints of blood into a cell when there's none, there's to start off with, and when the invigilator, shall we say, gets searched before he comes in. Yes, sir. You can. Well, ask about that, and I to know if I ought to tell you. After all, I might want to use that particular. Anything to do with the little rubber ring for piles, perhaps? Evans grinned feebly. Clever, though, wasn't it? Must have been a tricky job, sticking a couple of pins. Nah, you have got it wrong, sir. No problem about that. No? Nah, it's the clothing, you see. That's the big trouble. We got the blood easy enough. Pig's blood. It was from the slaughter's house in Kintlington. But to stop it clotting, you have got to mix your actual blood. Evans took a breath. With one tenth of its own volume of 3.8% of trisodium citrate, did not know that you, sir? The governor shook his head in token of reluctant admiration. We learn something new every day. They tell me, come on, my lad. Evans made no show of resistance, and side by side the two men walked slowly down the stairs. Tell me, Evans, how did you manage to plan all this business? You have had no visitors, I have seen to that. You have had no letters. I have got lots of friends, though. What's that supposed to mean? Me, German teacher, for a start? You mean, but he was from a technical college. Was he? Evans was almost enjoying it all now. Ever check upon him, sir? God Almighty, there's far more going on than I've always will be, sir. Everything's ready? Asked the governor as they stood by the reception desk. The van's out the front, sir, said the pretty blonde receptionist. Evans winked at her, and she winked back at him. I almost made his day. A silent prison officer handcuffed the recaptured Evans, and together the two men clambered awkwardly into the back seat of the prison van. See you soon, Evans. It was almost as if Governor was saying farewell to an old friend after a cocktail party. Cheerio, sir. I never. I was just wondering. I know your German's pretty good, sir, but do you know any more of these modern languages? Not very well. Why? Ivan settled himself comfortably on the back seat and grinned happily. Nothing really. I just happened to notice that you have got some O level Italian classes coming up next September. That's all. Perhaps you won't be with us next September, Evans. James Roderick Evans appeared to ponder the governor's words deeply. No, perhaps I won't, he said, as the prison van turned right from Chipping Norton onto the Oxford Road. The hitherto silent prison officer unlocked the handcuff and leaned forward toward the driver. For Christ's sake, get a move on. It won't take them long to find out. Where do you suggest we make for? Asked the driver in a broad Scot accent. What about Newbury? Suggested Evans. So that was the story, and at last Evans did really escaped from the prison by making the governor fool again, or you can say governor did wanted to be a fool because Evans did something great. So that was all for today. If you like my narration, please do like, share, and subscribe my videos. At the same time, do comment about the next project.